You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you may not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. Pop over to Progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with discounts that are easy to come by. In fact, 99% of their auto customers earn at least one discount. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.
Some days call for some oomph to amplify your everyday look. Like when you want the look of false lashes without the extra effort. Reach for Thrive Cosmetics Liquid Lash Volumizer Mascara. Or when you want all eyes on your smile, keep Empower Gloss Ultra Glossy Lip Serum in your bag. It's a burst of 24-hour hydration that smooths like a serum, shines like a gloss, and can be worn sheer or layered. You'll also look and feel your best with Thrive Cosmetics. Plus, every product is 100% vegan, cruelty-free, and made with clean, skin-loving ingredients that work with your skin, not against it. And for every product purchased, Thrive Cosmetics donates to help communities thrive. So every time you use your favorite Thrive Cosmetics product, you're helping communities you care about too. Amplify your everyday. Go to thrivecosmetics.com/shine26 for an exclusive offer of 20% off your first order. That's Thrive Cosmetics, CAUSEMETICS.com/shine26.
To enjoy this episode ad-free, please visit patreon.com/forensic tales.
Forensic Tales discusses topics that some listeners may find disturbing. The contents of this episode may not be suitable for everyone. Listener discretion is advised.
On the morning of February 9th, 2023, 43-year-old Crystal McCrory Jones woke up feeling sick and scheduled a doctor's appointment. But when the appointment time came and went, Crystal never showed up. At first, it may not have seemed unusual. People miss appointments all the time. But as the hours passed, phone calls and texts went unanswered, and the people who knew Crystal best began to worry. Eventually, her husband contacted police and requested a welfare check, and what they found was devastating. Crystal was dead from a gunshot wound to the head. Less than 2 hours later, the police ruled her death a suicide. But for her family, that conclusion raised more questions than answers. As they began reviewing the evidence for themselves, they found inconsistencies in the forensic evidence and how the investigation was handled that they couldn't ignore. And more than 3 years later, they are still searching for answers. This is Forensic Tales, episode 340, The Suspicious Death of Crystal McCrory Jones, Part 1. Welcome to Forensic Tales. I'm your host, Courtney Fretwell. Forensic Tales is a weekly true crime podcast with a forensic twist. Each episode features real stories highlighting how forensic science was used to uncover the truth. If you enjoy deep dives into real cases and the science behind them, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. And if you want even more content, including monthly full-length bonus episodes and early ad-free access to over 300 episodes, you can join our community over on Patreon. The support there truly helps keep the show going. To learn more, visit patreon.com/forensic tales. And one small favor that makes a huge difference for the show. If you're enjoying Forensic Tales, please consider leaving a positive review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps other listeners discover the podcast. One of the most important decisions made during any death investigation happens long before a case ever reaches a courtroom. In fact, many cases never make it to a courtroom at all because of a single determination made by a forensic pathologist. When someone dies unexpectedly, medical examiners are tasked with answering two separate questions. The first is cause of death. What physically caused the person's death? And the second is the manner of death. How did that death occur? In the United States, death investigations generally fall into 5 categories: natural, accidental, suicide, homicide, or undetermined. Sometimes those classifications are straightforward, but other times they're anything but. Because while forensic science can provide important clues, investigators are often forced to reconstruct events they never witnessed, relying on physical evidence, witness statements, medical history, autopsy findings, and scene observations to piece together what happened. And depending on how that evidence is interpreted, 2 experts can sometimes look at the exact same case and reach very different conclusions. Today's case centers around one of those disagreements, a disagreement not only about how a woman died, but also whether the investigation into her death was thorough enough to reach that conclusion in the first place. And before we go any further, I want to be honest with you. This case feels personal to me. Not because I knew Crystal, I never had the chance to meet her, but because over the past several weeks, I've spent countless hours reviewing this case. Thousands of pages of documents, police reports, autopsy findings, crime scene photographs, recorded interviews, medical records, court filings, notes and correspondence provided by Crystal's family. And the deeper I got into the case, the more I realized this wasn't simply a story about a disputed manner of death. It's a story about a family searching for answers. Now, that doesn't mean every question has an easy answer. What it does mean is that Crystal's story deserves to be told. So throughout this 2-part episode, we're going to carefully walk through the timeline of that day, the forensic evidence, the investigation, and the questions that continue to surround her death. And to do that, we first need to understand who Crystal McCrory Jones was. Crystal was born on May 17th, 1979, to parents Janie and Doyle in the normally quiet town of Crossett, Arkansas, in the southeastern part of the state. With a population of fewer than 5,000 people today, it's the kind of place where familiar faces are everywhere, and news tends to travel fast. When Crystal was born, she became her parents' second child, but first daughter. So, like any newborn baby girl, she quickly became the apple of her parents' eyes. Some years later, Janie remarried, and when Crystal was about 10 years old, her mom gave birth to twins, Jana and Josh. With the addition of her younger siblings, Crystal became one of 4 children. Family would remain a central part of her life, and those close relationships created a strong support system that would stay with her well into adulthood. One thing I read time and time again was about Crystal's zest for life. She was kind and generous to everyone she crossed paths with. She loved to cook, especially for the holidays. She loved stopping by local thrift shops to buy stuff. And she was just the kind of person who would give a complete stranger the shirt off her back if they needed it, a quality that likely came from her strong Christian faith. In 1997, Crystal graduated from Bastrop High School and moved to New York with her boyfriend, Jeremy. Life seemed to move quickly from there. The couple got married and before long were preparing to welcome a son into the world. For Crystal, it was a season filled with excitement and possibility. She was thrilled about becoming a mother, and once her son arrived, it was clear she had found one of her greatest joys in life. From everything I've gathered about Crystal, I can confidently say she was a natural mother. She was devoted, and she was happiest when she was taking care of the people she loved. Although her marriage to Jeremy didn't last, Crystal continued moving forward. And as she entered a new chapter of her life, she met another man, and the two eventually married. Then, in 2004, Crystal became a mother for the second time when they welcomed a son together. For someone who loved being a mom as much as Crystal did, it was another joyful milestone in her growing family. But I don't think this relationship was easy for Crystal. Her husband was a Marine, which meant he wasn't always home. He had even been deployed to Iraq at one point during their marriage. So Crystal spent much of that time by herself, working as a waitress and focusing on caring for her 2 young children. Unfortunately, that marriage didn't last either, and by 2014, they were divorced, and Crystal moved back to Louisiana to be closer to her family. But despite the failed relationships, there was one thing about Crystal that never wavered: her love and devotion to her children. No matter what was going on in her relationships, she always put them first. And I think her move to Louisiana was something she was really excited about. She got to be closer to her family, especially her younger sister Jana. Although they were several years apart in age, they were more than sisters. They were best friends. While now living in Louisiana, Crystal wore many different hats. She was a mother. She was still working as a waitress. But she was also climbing the corporate ladder. Her work ethic and determination landed her a job working as a licensed office representative at State Farm Insurance. She also found love again, marrying another high school friend. But just a few years later, another man would wander into Crystal's life. A man who changed her life forever. His name was Tony Joe Jones. He and Crystal first crossed paths when he showed up to fix the heater at Crystal's and her then husband's home. Although both Tony and Crystal were married to their own respective spouses, that didn't stop Tony from pursuing Crystal. Very quickly, he turned from being just the maintenance man to someone who promised Crystal the future she had always dreamed about. He told her how beautiful she was. He told her he would take care of her and the kids financially. He told her he owned his own business. He owned a rental property. He basically promised her the world. And for someone like Crystal, this was probably a dream come true. So by 2018, a now 38-year-old Crystal divorced her husband and married Tony. Then shortly after that, they moved to Oak Grove together, along with Tony's teenage daughter. For a while, life was really good for both of them. Tony continued to work as a maintenance guy, doing electrical, heating, and cooling repairs around town. And Crystal was still working at State Farm Insurance. They had even opened a karate school called Inner Peace Martial Arts, where Crystal managed the business's back office duties.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. The process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
By the start of 2023, Crystal had already gotten a new title that she wore proudly: Grandma. Tony's son from a previous relationship had welcomed a new baby to the family, which meant Crystal was now a grandmother to her step-grandson. But beyond that, there were many other changes in her life. Her own 2 sons were now grown and living on their own. The eldest had moved away to New York, and her youngest had joined the Navy. And for someone like Crystal, who prided herself on being a great mom, this was likely a difficult time. As a mom to a toddler myself, it seems like my son moving out and starting his own life is a lifetime away. But as everyone has told me in the past, the days are long, but the years are short. Although she missed her children, she had something else to be excited about. She had just found out her oldest son was expecting a child. And if you ask anyone in Crystal's life, they would all say she was over the moon about it. But just a few weeks later, her family would receive a phone call that every family dreads. 43-year-old Crystal was dead. Before we get into the details surrounding her death, we have to start from the morning of February 9th, 2023. That morning, Crystal woke up not feeling well, and just like many of us would, she picked up the phone, called her doctor, and scheduled an appointment for later that afternoon at 2:30 to get checked out. At 8:06, Crystal's husband, Tony, left the house in Oak Grove for work like he normally did and arrived at his customer's house on Candace Lane, where he was scheduled to fix a refrigerator at approximately 8:54. Then after that, Crystal was said to go about her normal morning routine. She had coffee, she styled her hair, she put on makeup. It seemed to be the start of an ordinary day. Nothing about that morning could have forewarned what was about to happen. But as the morning turned into the afternoon, something strange began to happen. According to Tony, Crystal stopped responding to his texts and phone calls, which was completely out of character for her. The last time he said he spoke to her was over the phone at around 10:06 that morning. He asked what she was doing and stayed on the phone with her for about 15 to 20 minutes before hanging up and getting back to work. That was the last time he said he ever spoke to his wife. It would also be the last time anyone ever heard from her. When Crystal stopped answering his texts that afternoon, Tony became concerned and decided to call the doctor's office to see if she had shown up to her appointment. But the office staff told him she was a no-show. His next phone call was to Deputy Chuck Harris with the West Carroll Parish Sheriff's Office, asking him if he had a few minutes to stop by the house just to make sure everything was okay with Crystal. He told him everything about how she stopped answering his calls and didn't even show up to her doctor's appointment. So he wanted Deputy Harris to stop by the house and make a quick welfare check, and Deputy Harris agreed. When Harris first arrived at the house, he tried knocking on the door, hoping Crystal would answer, but no one did. And as his hand pulled away from the door, that's when he noticed something even stranger. The door was unlocked. So he called Tony back and told him Crystal wasn't answering, but the door was unlocked. So Tony gave him permission to enter. And what he found inside the house just after 4:30 that afternoon would change so many lives forever. In the bedroom, Deputy Harris found Crystal dead on her bed from a single gunshot wound to the head, fired through a pillow that was positioned over her face. She was still holding the gun, a 9mm Ruger pistol, in her manicured right hand, all but one finger with the nail broken off. Just 2 hours later, her death had already been ruled a suicide. But for Crystal's family, the story was only beginning. Because as they started requesting records, reviewing reports, and examining the forensic evidence for themselves, they found details that didn't seem to fit the official narrative. Details they believe should have prompted additional questions rather than a rapid conclusion, and over time, those questions would only multiply. One of the first people from Crystal's family to get to the house was her younger sister, Jana, at around 5:08 that evening. She was immediately met with bright yellow crime scene tape around the house, and Tony hugging her saying, "It's a single gunshot wound to the head." But when Jana asked about going into the house and seeing her sister with her own 2 eyes, Tony was hesitant, telling her, "Come on, Jana, you don't need to see her like this." Over the next 34 minutes, while Crystal's sister stood outside the home waiting for information, no one from the West Carroll Parish Sheriff's Office approached her or even asked who she was. Yet as deputies moved around the scene, she couldn't help but notice that many of them appeared to know Tony's family personally, greeting relatives by their first names and speaking with a familiarity that stood out to her. At the time, it was simply an observation, but as the investigation unfolded, it would become one of many details that left Crystal's family questioning whether everyone involved had been viewed through the same lens. Crystal's husband, Tony, was interviewed by the West Carroll Parish Sheriff's Department at 6:45 that night, An interview that should have been one of the most important that this agency would do. Not only is Tony Crystal's husband, but he was also the last person to see or speak to her before she allegedly took her own life. If anyone could help investigators understand what happened during her final hours, it should have been him. But that interview with Tony Jones only lasted 7 minutes and was conducted before the medical examiner even had a chance to examine her body. Fortunately, a recording of that interview exists, and while you won't hear the actual audio in this episode, portions of the transcript will be read by contributors to help illustrate what was said that evening. Here's part of that interview. I've excluded certain parts for privacy reasons, but the portions of the transcripts I've included remain the same.
This is Alan Irby, Chief Deputy with the West Carroll Sheriff's Office. Today's date is February 9th, 2023. The time is 18:45 hours. The place is the West Carroll Parish CID. I'll be taking a statement this afternoon from Tony Jones. I'll be taking this statement from Tony in reference to a self-inflicted gunshot wound of his wife, Mrs. Crystal McCrory Jones. Tony and Crystal were married for 5 years and lived together. Tony, we responded to your residence this afternoon, the West Carroll Sheriff's Office investigators and deputies, in reference to your wife, Ms. Crystal, a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Could you walk me through your and her activities of today, starting from when you left your residence this morning?
I left the residence shortly after 8 o'clock. I went to Bastrop to a customer's house in Bastrop. Worked on stuff for him, and I left there. And it was shortly before 10 o'clock or so. I called Crystal at 10:06, and she answered the phone. And I was like, "What are you doing?" And I stayed on the phone with her for 15 or 20 minutes, I'd say. And I had another job to do in Forest High School. So I went into town, I put a check in the bank, I turned around, and then I went to eat at Bakery Barn. I left there and went to Forest High School, and I was there until just shy of 3 o'clock. I got my daughter I checked her out from school since I was already there at like 2:45, and I drove to and I'd sent her a message saying, "Hey, I got little girl." And she didn't respond, which she normally does. Then I drove into town, and me and my daughter got something to eat at Sonic, and I tried to call her again, and she didn't answer. So then I contacted the East Carroll Medical Clinic because she had an appointment at 2:30.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, and this was like 3:45 or something. And I asked them, I said, "My wife was supposed to have an appointment. Is she still there?" And I gave them her name, and she was like, "Well, she never checked in." And so then I tried to call a couple more times, and we were worried at that point. So I called Deputy Harris. He is my neighbor.
I want to stop there for a moment. Before we get back to the interview, there's something you should know about Tony and Deputy Harris's relationship. Tony was not a stranger to the West Carroll Parish Sheriff's Department. In fact, he had previously worked there. That means the deputy who responded to Crystal's home that afternoon wasn't simply responding to a call from a member of the public. He was responding to a call involving someone he already knew. But that's not the only thing that stands out. According to the timeline, Tony was in the area and had been trying to reach Crystal throughout the afternoon. Yet rather than going to the house himself, he contacted the sheriff's department and requested a welfare check. Now, people respond differently when they can't reach a loved one, and there may be perfectly reasonable explanations for that decision. But given what would ultimately be discovered inside the home, Crystal's family has long questioned why a welfare check was requested in the first place, rather than Tony simply returning home himself. Now, to be clear, this alone doesn't prove wrongdoing, bias, or misconduct of any kind. In smaller communities, relationships like these aren't unusual. People know one another. They work together. They grow up together. That's simply the reality of many small towns. But it does create a dynamic worth acknowledging, because within a matter of hours, the same agency that had long-standing ties to Tony would be responsible for investigating the death of his wife. Let's get back to Tony's interview.
And he said he was almost home, that he would go check. So he got there, and he said that no one was answering the door. Her vehicle was there. I was like, well, please go inside. The door is unlocked. He went inside, was calling her name. I said the bedroom is in the very back of the house. And her name is Crystal, and so he's calling Crystal, 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 and
Were you still on the phone with him?
I was still on the phone with him.
Okay.
And he opened the door and he said, Crystal, Crystal. And then at that point he said, Tony, I'm sorry to tell you that she is deceased. And so then I rushed home.
Where were you at that time?
I was at the bowling alley by our karate school.
Okay. When you talked to her on the phone, at 10, how did she sound?
It took her a couple of rings to actually get it. And I was like, she was like, hey. And I was like, hey. I said, what you doing? She was like, I was in the living room. And I was like, oh, okay. I was like, it sounded like you were asleep. And she was like, no, I wasn't asleep. I was just in the living room. So, and I talked to her. We sat on the phone for a few minutes and she wasn't really saying anything. 'Cause I talk to her while I drive a lot. And I talk to her while she's driving. And I was like, all right. Well, I said, I'm going to get off of here. You can get back to what you were doing. And she was like, okay. And I was like, I love you. And she said, I love you. That's the last time I talked to her.
What handguns were available to her in the bedroom, Tony?
I don't know if in her purse there was a 9mm. I don't know if that's the one she used. But there was also a .45 in the nightstand. And that's the gun case was locked because I lost the key. So, it was either the 9mm or the .45.
It was you think a ECS 9mm?
Yeah, it was a little small.
Small frame.
That was the one she had, yeah.
So that gun belonged to her?
Yes, well, it was in my name, but that was the one she carried.
Right?
For protection.
Okay, was Crystal right or left-handed?
She was right-handed.
Okay, all right. I believe that is all the information that I'm going to require from you, Tony. Is there anything that you would like to add or take away from this statement you have given me this evening?
I don't believe so.
That interview with Tony lasted only 7 minutes. It was conducted about 2 hours after Crystal's body was discovered and before her body could even be examined by a medical examiner. And the terms self-inflicted gunshot were already being thrown around. But since that initial interview, several sources suggest that his account of that day and his whereabouts may have changed. Here's what I mean. If your anxiety or depression is more than just a rough patch, you might need more than talk therapy or self-help tools. Talk a Tree connects you with real psychiatric care, so you can actually understand what's going on and get a treatment and medication plan that works. All 800-plus clinicians are in network with major insurers, so you can use your existing insurance instead of paying monthly subscriptions or out-of-network costs. Getting started takes just a few minutes. Complete a short online assessment, get matched with clinicians who fit your needs, and schedule your first visit in days, not months. And because you continue with the same provider, you're not starting over each visit. Your treatment can evolve with you, so you're actually making progress over time. Head to talkayatree.com/tales and complete the short assessment to get matched with an in-network psychiatrist in just a few minutes. That's talkayatree.com/tales to get matched in minutes. In that initial interview, Tony never mentions getting a haircut. However, in a later police report, it says that he stopped for a haircut before heading to grab a bite to eat at Bakery Barn. There's also the issue of picking up his daughter from school early, around 2:45. Typically, she would have taken the bus home. But on this particular day, he decided to pull her out of school early and drive her himself. Now, depending on which report you read, Tony's whereabouts after leaving Sonic are a little unclear. Some accounts state that he went to his karate studio. Others suggest he went to the bowling alley, where Crystal was supposedly planning to meet him later that day. According to Tony's own statements to police, at 12 o'clock, he arrived at Forest High School, where Detective Alan Irby later claimed he had been working all day. However, Tony's business license had been revoked, so he wasn't legally authorized to perform contracted work at a public school. He was also never tested for gunshot residue to determine whether he had recently fired a gun or not. And unfortunately, this won't be the last time we run into conflicting information. One of the biggest challenges in this case is the numerous discrepancies throughout the timeline. Different reports, statements, and accounts don't always match up, making it difficult to determine exactly what happened, when it happened, and who was where at any given time. And to muddy the waters even more, no outside law enforcement agency was ever called in, and the state police never reviewed the case. Even when Crystal's family begged for help from the Louisiana State Police, they were turned away. So it was Crystal's husband's former employer who conducted the entire investigation into her death and ruled it a suicide within 2 hours. When investigators first arrived at the scene, their immediate job wasn't to determine how Crystal died. Their job was to document everything, every photograph, every piece of physical evidence, every observation. Because once a scene changes, there's no way to go back and recreate it exactly as it was found. That's why crime scene processing is often one of the most critical stages of any investigation. The photographs taken, the evidence collected, and the notes documented in those first few hours can shape the direction of a case for years to come. And in Crystal's case, many of the concerns raised by her family begin right here, at the scene itself. One of the first concerns centered on the scene documentation itself. Despite responding to a fatal shooting, investigators took only about 40 photographs of the bedroom. And notably, none of those images documented what should have been a critical piece of evidence, the spent shell casing. And here's where this story gets even more confusing. A week later, Crystal's husband came forward with a startling claim. He said he found the missing shell casing, the one investigators missed, even after taking 40 crime scene photographs. And where did he find it? According to Tony, he found it on Crystal's makeup table, underneath some of her hairstyling tools. He said he was simply cleaning the bedroom when he stumbled upon it, as if it had been hiding in plain sight this entire time. But just wait. Things get stranger. The sheriff's office said the casing was plain as day in the crime scene photos. But if you ask Crystal's family, who has access to every single one of these photos, they say it wasn't there. So that begs two very important questions. Did skilled investigators really miss a critical piece of forensic evidence? Or was it never there to begin with? I'll be posting the picture of the missing shell casing to our social media pages, along with other important case photographs, if you're interested in checking them out for yourself. But before moving on from the gun into other troubling aspects of the scene, there are a few more things you should know about. I mentioned a moment ago that no one at the sheriff's office conducted any type of gunshot residue testing on Tony's hands during that 7-minute interview. They also didn't do any forensic testing on his clothing, shoes, or truck, which in hindsight is very problematic. If any type of gunshot residue testing was done on him, we would have our answer as to whether he had handled a gun recently. And the same could be said about Crystal. No gunshot residue test was ever done on her either. Everyone just assumed that because she was the one who had the gun in her hand, she must have been the one to fire it. But besides the gun's location, there was never any forensic testing done to conclusively determine who fired it, including fingerprint testing. We know from the crime scene photos that when the police first arrived, Crystal was found with a pillow over her face and a gunshot through the pillow. And according to investigators, The gun was still in her hand, but it didn't chamber the next round. Without being an expert on firearms, I had to rely on what I learned from what the sheriff's office wrote in their official reports and what Crystal's family's private investigators said about why the gun didn't chamber the next round. And trust me, what I learned is very interesting. The gun that Crystal allegedly shot herself with had likely experienced a mechanical malfunction known as limp wrist failure. In simple terms, when a semi-automatic gun is fired, the slide is supposed to move backward, eject the spent casing, and load a new bullet into the chamber. But if the person holding the gun has a loose grip, some of that energy can be absorbed by their hand and wrist. And when that happens, the slide may not move back far enough to complete the cycle, causing the gun to jam rather than load the next round. So now the question becomes, does this prove that Crystal committed suicide as the police said, or does it point to something else? The sheriff's office believes the malfunction supports their conclusion that Crystal died by suicide. Their reasoning was that if Crystal fired the gun herself, her grip could have immediately relaxed after the shot, causing the gun to jam instead of loading another round. But that's not the only possible explanation. Some people wonder, including private investigators hired by Crystal's own family, whether that same malfunction could have also occurred during a physical struggle. Here's how that theory goes. If another person had been holding the gun, or if Crystal had been fighting for control of it, the unstable movement and shifting grip could have produced the exact same result. In other words, the malfunction itself doesn't necessarily tell us who was holding the gun. It simply tells us that the gun didn't cycle properly after it was fired. There is still one more thing I want to mention about the gun. The official ballistics report created by the sheriff's office misidentified the weapon. The case file said the gun was a Ruger EC9. However, a check of the gun's serial number shows it was an LC9, not a Ruger EC9. Perhaps that was just a simple mistake on behalf of the people who are supposed to be investigating Crystal's death with care. But as you're about to find out throughout these next 2 episodes, that's just one of many, many investigative mistakes made along the way. In almost every alleged suicide case, there is a 911 call that initiates the start of a formal investigation. The call is recorded, and it sets the tone for everything that follows. But Crystal's case is the exception. Since Tony had his former law enforcement colleague go to the house, there's no documented 911 call. It wasn't recorded, and Tony called the deputy on his personal cell phone. And the lack of documentation doesn't end there. There's no mention of things like whether the bedroom door was open or closed when they got there. There were even crime scene photos showing Crystal's dog on the bed next to her body. So it has to make you wonder how secure this scene actually was. In any shooting investigation, especially one where the manner of death has not yet been conclusively established, the scene should be treated as a potential crime scene. But in this case, that never happened.
You're listening to this podcast, so I know you've got a curious mind. Here's a helpful fact you may not know yet. Drivers who switch and save with Progressive save over $900 on average. Pop over to Progressive.com, answer some questions, and you'll get a quick quote with discounts that are easy to come by. In fact, 99% of their auto customers earn at least one discount. Visit Progressive.com and see if you can enjoy a little cash back. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $946 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2024 and May 2025. Potential savings will vary.
In the days following Crystal's death, her family was still trying to process what had happened. And while they were grieving, life continued moving forward. Decisions had to be made. Funeral arrangements had to be discussed. paperwork had to be completed. And according to records reviewed for this episode, Tony had already begun taking steps to collect Crystal's life insurance policy, which was valued at approximately $63,000, less than 24 hours later. Then came another decision. Against the wishes of Crystal's family, Tony authorized her cremation. And as her legal spouse at the time of her death, he was allowed to make that decision despite what her family wanted. To some people, that decision may not sound unusual. Thousands of families choose cremation every single year. But in a case where questions had already begun to pop up, the decision carried significant consequences. Once Crystal was cremated, there would be no opportunity for a second autopsy, no additional gunshot residue testing, no reevaluation of injuries, no chance for another forensic pathologist to independently evaluate her body. Whether intentional or not, that opportunity was gone forever. But before the cremation took place, Crystal's family gathered to make arrangements for the funeral. And like many families do after a sudden loss, they wanted to help prepare her. They wanted to do her hair, apply her makeup, make sure she looked beautiful, make sure she looked like Crystal. Instead, they were confronted with something they never expected. As they spent time with Crystal's body, family members began noticing injuries. Bruises, they say, had never been mentioned by investigators. Bruises that seemed inconsistent with the story they had been told. And as they looked closer, the questions that had been quietly building since the day Crystal died suddenly became impossible to ignore. Because if Crystal had simply died from a single gunshot wound to the head, where had all these other injuries come from? At the time, Crystal's family had no way of knowing that the bruises they were seeing were only the beginning, because in the days and weeks that followed, they would obtain investigative records, photographs, and eventually the autopsy report itself. And according to the family, what they found would completely change their understanding of what happened to Crystal on February 9th, 2023. What started as questions about a few unexplained injuries would soon become questions about the entire investigation. And that's where we'll pick up in Part 2. Part 2 of the suspicious death of Crystal McCrory Jones will be released this Thursday, July 9th, 2026. But if you'd rather not wait, Part 2 is available right now on Patreon, completely ad-free. In the next episode, we'll examine the autopsy findings, the injuries documented on Crystal's body, the forensic evidence, and the questions that continue to surround this case more than 3 years later. To share your thoughts on Part 1 of Crystal's story, be sure to follow us on social media at Forensic Tales. And if you want to listen to new episodes early and ad-free, consider signing up for our Patreon at patreon.com/forensictales. You can get early ad-free access to new episodes and monthly full-length bonus episodes for as little as $3 a month. Your support on Patreon directly helps to fund the show's production, research, and editing costs. And as an independent, one-woman podcast, your support truly helps to keep this show going. Forensic Tales is a Rockefeller audio production. The show is written and produced by me, Courtney Fretwell. If you'd like to support the show and help fund research, production, and editing, you can do so with a small monthly contribution on Patreon. Patreon supporters get early access to ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content. You can learn more at patreon.com/forensictales. Thank you so much to this week's newest Patreon supporters, Kathy J., Randy T., and Linda M. And if you enjoy the show, leaving a positive rating or review really helps others discover it. For a full list of sources used in this episode, visit forensictales.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Until then, remember, not all stories have happy endings.
The question isn't whether the world is changing. It's whether you'll be ready for it. At Arizona State University, your education is built around the careers of the future. You learn from renowned faculty and researchers who are driving their fields forward, not just teaching about it. It's why we're ranked #1 in innovation and #2 in employability among U.S. public universities. Future-proof your career. Explore more than 350 programs at asuonline.asu.edu. That's a degree better.